Click that there, and theoretically, we should be broadcasting live on the Twitch. Welcome to 2021. I wasn't sure I was going to make it, to be honest with you. I mean, I figured it was 50-50 chance, based on how the last year went. But we're here. We're here, and I'm joined by my good friend, Scott Davis. Good morning, Scott. How are you, sir?
Oh, it's so good to see you, mate. We talked on New Year's
Yes, we
Eve,
did.
and so I mean, it was like last year, but it
Right,
just seems
right.
like it was a couple days ago.
Yeah. Do you remember being in school? I very distinctly remember this at the end of the year saying, "Hey, see you next year," and we all thought we were so clever. At the end of the term, we're like, "Aren't we so smart?" But we're here. Well, so how you been, Scott? Why don't you tell people who you are for the three people watching this who don't know who Scott Davis is, the man, the myth, the legend. Give us your background, my friend.
Nate, you and I have known each other for what,
Long
going
time.
on 2 decades
I
now.
think
Now
we're in
at
that
this
zone.
point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Nate and I met on a conference tour, and we have continued to keep in touch. We will meet in the TSA lines and the executive lounges, airport
The
lounges.
finest lounges in the land.
Across the world. No, but I'm a principal engineer. I'm a digital accessibility advocate with ThoughtWorks, consultancy that's across about 18 countries or so.
Outstanding, outstanding. And I know you've been playing around quite a bit with audio and video these days. What's fueling that? That is it's just a reaction to pandemic times. You got all this extra time at home, so let's learn a new technology.
Well, I mean, you want to talk forcing functions, right?
Right.
My whole job was flying around the world and getting on stage and talking to large crowds of people. So,
I can
other than
relate.
the flying around the world
Right.
and the getting on the stage and the large crowds of people, my job has remained unchanged,
Unchanged, completely
absolutely
unchanged.
unchanged, right? And so, we were just laughing about this, but yes, this is my brand new setup. This is what my 2021 looks like. And so, yeah, I really am trying to settle into this new medium and figure out like what it means. And you've probably figured this out, or your wife
I'm
definitely has
trying.
figured this out. That we've got speaker voice.
Oh yes.
We are built to be
Mm-hmm.
on stage
Mm-hmm.
talking to 1,000 people. That doesn't quite
Mm-mm.
work in a medium
Mm-mm.
like this. That is super annoying. If I was on screen
Right.
screaming and doing all that. So it has really forced me to reconsider like a lot of things. My knowledge hasn't changed. I'm still talking about the same technology, but my techniques in the
Sure.
in the forum absolutely have to change. Everyone talks about lift and shift, moving to the cloud, moving their on-prem hardware, their on-prem server and everything, data and everything up to, the cloud. We've tried lifting and shifting our
Right.
profession from being on stage to being on a tiny little postage stamp screen, and lift and shift doesn't work, right?
Right.
It doesn't work for data centers, and it doesn't work for our profession either. So we got to find a way to be effective, with the communication medium that we're dealing with these days.
It's funny you mentioned the speaker voice because so my wife and I share an office now that we're both working from home, and she's normally right across my shoulder. But she learned pretty early on in this whole pandemic that I do not, in fact, have an indoor voice. And so we realized that I have to sort of run my schedule by her at the beginning of the week and make sure that we're all on the same page if I need to be doing a presentation because I don't have an indoor voice. And so she told me that I shout apparently when I present. And she was on a meeting while I was presenting, and someone on the meeting said, "Christine, I think you left your TV on." And she said, "No, that's just my husband." So, I guess we got that going for us, but
Well, my wife and I, Kim and I, have decided that on my tombstone, I'm going to have engraved, "This is my inside
right.
voice."
Right. But I mean, it's a professional necessity. You don't want to be that person who, "Can you hear me in the back?" Like, this
Yeah,
isn't ASMR,
yeah.
right? This is supposed to be
Hmm.
a different profession
Hmm.
for sure, for sure.
But it is interesting what's so effective on stage, what makes you so effective on stage is a detriment when
Sure.
you're say pair programming and
Sure.
turning to someone and yelling in their ear, or
Right.
you're trying to share a space with
Right.
your
Right.
wife and things like this. So it's what's tough is you've gotten so much positive feedback saying this is good and you're good for doing this and you should
Right.
keep doing this good thing, good person. And then everything changes and it's like, that's not so good anymore. It's like, dude, you
No,
really have
don't
to
do
dial
that.
it back.
Gotta
You're
turn it down.
killing
Turn it
me.
down.
All right.
Right.
So all of the pandemic, all of 2020 felt like a whisper to me.
Right.
It felt like a whisper.
Which meant it was probably causing some amount of deafening to people around you.
Yeah,
Totally,
exactly.
totally. Yeah, 100%, 100%. So have you picked up any habits during the pandemic other than this newfound attention to audio and video technology? Because I am very impressed with your setup. I clearly have to kick my game up a notch or 10.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. One of the things, so like I have always wanted to garden. But since I'm on the road all the time, that's
Really
not
hard to
very
do.
conducive to gardening. Yeah. So Kim and I, we planted a garden last year. We did all of the things that like everyone is doing their whole life, and
Right.
we're brand new to it. But it's like, oh my God, look at this tomato. Can you believe this tomato? Look at it. Do
This
you want to buy
came
it? Do you eat the
from
whole
my
thing?
garden.
It's my tomato, but you can have a bite of it, And everyone's like, all right, yeah. And at the end of the year, you've got like barrels of them. You don't know what to do.
Right.
The other thing we've done, we've got this really killer no knead bread recipe where we really just in a bowl, we throw flour, yeast, salt, and water together. We let it sit on the counter overnight, put it in a cast iron Dutch oven. And so we've gotten really used to having amazing homemade fresh bread every other day. And so, the next time I'm eating at the complimentary buffet at a Motel 6, I'm like, Wonder Bread.
This
what
bread,
are you, savages?
This is not fresh homemade bread. This is not what I've come to expect. It's funny you mentioned bread. I started doing the bread thing a month and a half ago, I think, just because why not? It could finally get your hands on yeast again. It does amaze me. It never ceases to amaze me how you take a pile of flour and a couple other ingredients and several hours later you have a hunk of bread. It's like, how did somebody figure that out thousands of years ago? It's pretty remarkable, I think. But
yeah. Well, people who've heard me talk know that I use this recipe, this actual no knead recipe in my presentations, because it's a really amazing metaphor for web development. I've been a web developer for literally all my life. I graduated from university in 1993, University of Nebraska. Go Huskers. Netscape Navigator 2.0 was released in 1995. So I was like primed for it. That really profoundly influenced me, like more than anything else. And a lot of what I'm doing these days, of course, I've done my own healthy bit of server-side web development. My first book for O'Reilly was JBoss at Work.
Yeah. So
I spent a lot of time in the J2EE stack. Back when it had a 2 in it. That's what I'm talking about.
So old, man.
I know. And then spent a lot of years in Groovy and Grails and still just so impressed with what's going on with Micronaut these days. It's amazing that you can draw a straight line to what's really going on with that. But what I've really been focused on these days is browser native web development. Rather than HTML being generated, I use HTML as like my source code and my CSS and my JavaScript.
Talk.
And so in 2021, that's like one of the things I'm really playing around with. And it's interesting. I'm saying, is HTML input to you or output? Because if HTML is output, we're going to have a whole different conversation than if HTML is input. And so I'm trying to find a way to use that to tease out conversation, because web development is so broad. When I'm saying I'm a web developer and you're a web developer, and all of a sudden you're getting really angry at me on stage, and it's because I pull up VI and I start writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and their whole web development experience is create React app, where no lie, you get close to 3 million lines of JavaScript. That's 3 million lines of JavaScript for a hello world before you write your
Right.
own line of code. So it's really interesting how we both consider ourselves web developers, me and this straw
Right.
man
Straw
that I
person.
just
Yep.
stood up right there,
Right.
you know, but this is something that I experienced quite a bit because I wasn't used to people getting angry at me on stage.
Sure.
Off stage in my personal life, a whole
Right. Well,
different
Twitter. I mean, that's
scenario,
Twitter right there in a
you know?
nutshell. People getting angry
Yeah,
at you for
yeah.
no reason.
But I really realized it. I think that hinge right there is
Sure.
whether you consider HTML input or output, because it's a whole different worldview. You don't unit test output. You don't
Right.
unit test your exhaust, you
Right.
know. But when it's what you do, of course you lint it.
Sure.
Of course you make sure that it's well formed and accessible and all those kinds of good things.
Oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, Scott. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember when having a 1,500 line main JS would have been considered a lot of JavaScript. You know, what are you doing with all that JavaScript? And now, you know, there's so many apps that's what they are, is JavaScript. You know, and that's pretty remarkable. I think if you would have told me that in 2000, 2002, I'd have laughed at you. And then it's like, well, welcome to 2021. Yeah.
I think what's really interesting, and this pivoted right around the time Angular 2 came out. And so that's probably maybe 5 years ago at this point. And I might be getting the dates wrong. Maybe React was a little bit earlier on this, but plus or minus right in there. All the three big frameworks, React, Angular, and Vue, all kind of came out at that time. And they all are of a similar size and a similar tooling requirement and things like that. And so I like calling them platforms rather than frameworks. And I don't mean that as a pejorative, but I mean quite literally. When Flash, I know Flash just officially died.
Pour one out for Flash.
I know, put your hand over your heart. Well, Flash died for me when the iPhone came out in 2007, right?
Yes.
So this is old
100%.
news. This is I've been through all the stages of grief, the denial and the anger and the bargaining, and it's all done. But the reason why Flash didn't play well on an iPhone is because it was desktop software. It was perfectly optimized for 101 keys and a mouse and big beefy CPUs and all the RAM in the world and everything. And it was the wrong solution for like a mobile platform.
Right.
And now we are well over a 50% mobile web.
Yeah.
And we have been since about 2017. And we're on target in the next year or two to be 75% mobile web.
Wow. That's crazy.
And the majority of them are not mobile sometimes, mobile all the time. 75% of the world, this is what the internet looks like to them. And so it really does require you to kind of look at it differently and have a fresh set of eyes. And again, you and I have been in the business for around, we are the ones that are supposed to be settled in our ways. And this is the way we've always done it. And I'm writing for Internet Explorer, which also died last year. Internet Explorer died. Oh, it was such a banner year. I don't know why everyone's so upset about 2020.
I don't know.
It was a fantastic year for the web.
Yeah.
So.
It's funny you mentioned that because, well, and I should speak, the Goose of Wild is joining us again. Good evening, the Goose of Wild. You know, I sort of put that in terms of my son, because my son was born when the iPhone came out. And so he only knows a world with the iPhone in it. That's what a phone is to him, is a slab of glass.
The entire internet in your pocket.
Yes.
Of course, Dad.
It's always been that way. You know, and it's interesting to me to see how that shift has started to take hold. And I get it, because what's the device you have with you all the time? It's your phone. And we've definitely crossed over the point where only the true laggards are still using a flip phone. I mean, it's so weird. You watch a show now and you see somebody from 15 years ago, they pull like a BlackBerry out of their pocket. You're like, oh, BlackBerry, you know, where they have one of those candy bar phones. And, you know, we watched Love Actually again over the break, as always. And you see them talking on these little like stick phone things. And you're just like, yeah, we used to think that was a pretty cool phone. Not anymore. Not anymore. Now that's like, what is this? You know, I think Everett actually found one of our old cell phones and was like, I don't understand how this works.
I don't understand what this is.
This makes no sense. This makes no sense.
I think the other thing that really changed is that there is no keyboard, no
Right.
mouse on this. This whole touch interface, I know, I'm speaking from personal experience. I know that I used to think that, oh, a tap and a mouse click, they're
Hmm.
the same thing. I can just do on click and handle them both and away we go. And that was, again, this kind of generated HTML mindset. You
Hmm.
love to, you, not you, Nate, right? But one who is into generating their web
Right.
interfaces. That straw man that we're getting quite familiar with. We actually have a third person
Right. Right.
on this interview, don't we? The
The straw
straw
man.
man that I keep introducing to take out at the
Well,
knees.
we need a
But
protagonist.
no,
It's fine.
there we go. There we go. But no, I'm guilty of this, right? I
Right.
knew that it's like, oh, well, if I can do an on click and it'll handle both desktop and mobile, well, then we'll do that. And we try to ride that horse as far as we can.
Right.
And you don't realize, like, pinch and
Mm.
stretch and swipe and pull down to refresh. There are these like super rich gestures
Right.
that don't have any analog at
No.
all when you're on a laptop. But if you were a developer on a laptop thinking that you were developing for other users on a laptop,
Right.
you're going to totally miss that entire rich world of pinching and stretching and using these big kind of meat sticks on the end of your
And
arms.
isn't it annoying when you expect one of those things to work and it's not there?
Oh yeah.
I can't remember what app I was in, but I wanted to expand the photo to like zoom in on part of the photo, and it wasn't doing that. I like tried double tapping and it didn't work. I'm like, this is broken. Your website is broken, and it's just so aggravating how quickly your expectations change,
Yeah.
I still encounter very rarely those websites that just were not designed for anything other than a desktop experience. And I just think to myself, what is wrong with your developers? How can you not have solved this problem by now? This was forgivable 14 years ago. It's pretty hard to forgive now. You have to let your customers come at you in whichever way they want.
Yeah, yeah. A couple years after the iPhone came out, it was probably about 2009 or so. I spent a year at Yahoo
Oh, yeah.
running all their developers through mobile HTML5 training because they were a PHP shop.
Right.
Once again, I don't have anything bad to say about PHP. It's what runs Facebook today and ran Yahoo back in the day, and it was wicked fast up until it wasn't wicked fast.
Right.
But Yahoo quite literally had a www website
Mm-hmm.
and an m.yahoo.com for their mobile website. And then they had yahoo.com/tablet. So at the time, they had three different
Ouch.
user experiences, right? And again, this is not to put down Yahoo. That was state of the art at the time. That's when we're in these transformational periods, like when the iPhone comes out, when a series of smart speakers comes out about 5 years ago. That was another major revolution in user interfaces. But what I kept telling to the folks at Yahoo and all the training that I was doing and conference speaking and everything, said, you need the web to flow like water through all the glass in your users' lives. Because I absolutely expect to be watching Netflix on the big screen TV on the wall in my family room, and then hit pause and resume on my laptop, and hit pause and resume on my tablet, and hit pause and resume on my smartphone. That's just like the experience I expect now. And that's what's so awesome is the web enables that. I did a lot of smart TV development back in the day. Those smart TVs, whether they're, Samsungs or LGs or whatever, they're Linux boxes.
Right.
They're Linux boxes hanging on your walls with WebKit browsers. And so I was using HTML5 to do smart TV development. But again, I couldn't run these enormous, heavyweight desktop caliber platforms like React and Angular on these devices. And so you start realizing that browser native technology is there for a reason. You're never going to get higher Lighthouse scores than on native HTML. You're never going to get better security. You're never going to get better accessibility. You're never going to get better longevity. I mean, when you're dealing with browser native tech like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you absolutely should be able to forecast 5, 7, 10-year life cycles out of these things, because that's about, you know, the duration, you know, the new technology rollouts, you know, happen about every 5 to 10 years in the web space. So imagine getting 5 to 10 years ROI on your development rather than having to update. The half-life right now of a website's 18 months. So.
Well, so our good friend here, Goose of Wild, has had a couple of comments. I love the one about our children. Yeah, you're right. Our kids are just used to this. It's just air to them. You know, there's that adage that says anything that was around before you were born is just air to you. That's always been. There's never been a time before that. And then anything gets created up until you're in your mid 30s or mid 40s, you can figure it out. And then there's a line in the sand where after that point, I'm out. Like, I don't know how to deal with this thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know it's always blinking. I don't know how to change it. It just is what it is. Now, he also brings up voice UI, and I know this is an area of passion for you as well. Oh, yes. How do you see that changing how we interact with computers? Because obviously touch is a huge difference. You know, I noticed this. My son is doing school remotely, and I was doing something in he gets his own room for this. My wife and I have to share an office, and my kid gets to go to school in his old bedroom. This is so strange. Well, but he clearly has been, like, there's fingerprints on the Mac, and I'm like, you know, it's not touch. But every other device he has is touch. It's the iPad and the iPhone, and so it's all touch. And so clearly that was a big shift. How do you see the shift when it comes to spoken UIs? What do you see there?
Well, there really has been an evolution, right? The way that my dad, like my parents met at IBM, right? So the way my mom and dad interacted with computers was a keyboard, right? I
Literally mean, you not your mom and dad's computer.
yeah. But they had to type in their commands, and so you had this. There was a gap where you had to think about what you wanted. You'd have to type it in, and the computer would yell at you if you typed it wrong. It would never say, "Did you mean this?"
Right.
You know. And then mice came out in the we'll call it the 80s.
Yeah, close enough.
And that was something where it's like, all right, I want to touch this screen, but I can't. I have to move this thing on my desk, and it moves something on the screen as I'm moving my mouse. I am not kidding you. When I graduated from university, I spent the first 7 years training software outside of a university situation for business professionals. But we taught Windows classes because that's when Windows 3.1 came out, and people were moving from DOS to using this mouse. I was a highly paid professional, and my class involved, there's a difference between left click and right click. Oh, and after lunch, we're going to get into double click as well.
Ooh. Stay tuned for that after lunch.
We had to learn, right? We had to learn this new way, but there was an abstraction. It was move this thing over here and something moves on your screen.
Right.
And so now with these, we've disintermediated, right? We're now like, no, I can put my finger on the screen. I can physically move things around. But to your point, voice, no touchy.
Right.
No touchy. I can't tell you how awesome it is to have my hands covered with flour and water and yeast and say, hey, Alexa, set a timer for 20 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
We do that all the time. My kids would argue with me when it was time to go to school, walk to the bus, all those kinds of things.
We were so young
then. If I had Alexa do it, right? Then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, well, alarm's going off. It's time to go.
Right.
So conversational UIs to me are absolutely fascinating. Now, you and I have a good friend, David Geary, who actually dictated his last couple of books.
Wow.
These are big books, 300-400 page books. He spoke them.
Wow.
I don't know if I could do that, right? There are a lot of things about how you can type faster than you can think, but as a writer, maybe you need to think faster than you type.
Yeah.
But what's awesome about this is that the keyboard hasn't gone away, the mouse hasn't gone away, touch screen hasn't gone away, and voice, even though it's emergent and all there, it's not a replacement. What it is now is a multi-sensory approach to interfacing with your computers. Now, all of a sudden, even though I have all these things, I'm in VI. So
Yeah.
I am fastest when my hands are on my keyboard and doing things like that. But if my hands are on my keyboard, being able to say, hey, Siri, what time is it?
Right.
Hey, Siri, what's the weather outside? These kinds of things. It's all of these things. So it's not just choosing one and running with it. It's broadening the way we can interact with these computers, and our lives just get richer the more interfaces we have to our computers.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. You know, we were talking about this before we started. When I first got my Apple Watch, I was a little apprehensive, like, oh, what am I going to use this for other than just a neat little doodad? And I'm amazed at how many things I actually use it for that I never would have imagined before I got it. You know, I almost every day I ask my watch to set a timer for me. Almost every day. You know, do this in an hour, do that in 20 minutes. You know, and it's just become a habit. You just say it. And what's interesting to me is to see how good they've gotten that when it doesn't get it right, you get frustrated. You know, and it's like, what's going on with that? Like, how did you not get that right? You know, so it's going to be interesting to see how that matures. Speaking of that, one of the other ways I use voice a lot, and I think you probably introduced me to this trick, but on my Apple TV, when you're listening, watching a show and you didn't quite catch what the person just said, I love holding down that little dictate thing and saying, what did she just say? And it skips back 10 seconds and turns on the closed captioning. And it's like, that's amazing. Now, well, my wife would disagree with me. I don't think I'm hard of hearing, but boy, is that a powerful technology to have at my disposal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's funny because Netflix, for a while when you did that, would also turn on closed captioning.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have here is closed captioning, which has been around for 30 years, right? This is not new technology, but there are a lot of folks who don't use all the features of their TV, of their computer, of their smartphone. Did you know that 85% of all Facebook videos are watched with captions on?
I was going to ask you about that. What do you think? Why is that? What's your thoughts on that?
Because it's really a multi-sensory situation.
Sure.
When you're scrolling through your feeds, and I don't Facebook, but I Twitter, and so I'm absolutely the same thing.
Right.
If I hit a video and it auto plays muted,
what is it?
Scroll right past it. Not interested. Don't have time to click and wait to load and buffer and all that kind of stuff. But if I see closed captioning and I'm like, oh, that looks funny, or oh, that looks interesting, or something like that, I can then tap through and go on. And when you add closed captions to your videos, it does dramatically improve the click-through rate on these kinds of things.
Well, I
but
think
again, you want to talk about our kids just kind of assuming this? My son, who's just a first-year university student, he grew up watching anime, Japanese anime. And you know, if you're elite, you watch it in the original language with subtitles.
Sure.
And so he didn't ever think twice about it. He's like, this is how you watch anime.
Sure.
And then this is how he watches Friends and The Office and everything else he watches now. He says it really helps him multitask. So he could be watching something and doing something else and glance up and, just as you said, do a quick rewind. But that's just a feature anymore. That's not an accessibility feature to him. That's just a feature.
Yeah, I can see where that's particularly useful in a medium like Twitter or Facebook, where you're scrolling and you're kind of skimming. If there's no text, it's hard to skim video without the captions being on. The captions kind of give you that ability to say, what is this about? Is this worth 3 minutes of my time, or whatever it is, before I tap through it? But yeah, that's interesting.
I've been working at ThoughtWorks at getting closed captioning to be ubiquitous for all of our Zoom meetings, because if you miss that meeting, and it's recorded in the cloud, you've already spent your 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever your day is, right? You're not going to spend another 8 hours
watching video,
catching up, watching videos real time. But if we have transcripts, you can skim them. And if something looks interesting, you can turn around and begin to play just that snippet or anything. If we have written transcripts, all of our tens and tens of terabytes of video become searchable.
Right.
So it converts that bit flips from being a huge liability and a cost center to being a huge part of our knowledge management portfolio. So if I can do a quick search on accessibility within ThoughtWorks, I can get all of the public videos where people are talking about accessibility. I can skim the transcripts to see which ones look interesting and then actually commit to watching. So I'm doing that as a business professional for some value of the word. But I think people are doing that as well on Twitter and Facebook. They're going through those same evaluations. We don't read, we skim, and we skim and we glance, and it looks interesting, and we commit to going through. So,
well, it's funny. I think the Goose of Wild must be a friend of yours, or else you decided to give him. I think was it $50 that you're going to send to the Goose of Wild. Talking about accessibility has now gotten very large within our development community, and I mean, I know you and I've had this conversation on more than one occasion, but I personally am delighted to see more attention paid to this. And, you know, one of the last presentations I saw in the real world in 2020 was your talk at SACon around accessibility.
Yeah, Software Architecture Conf.
Exactly.
O'Reilly Software Architecture Conf in New York. Yeah.
We were so young then, weren't we? But I mean, I think that's such a huge shift because, to your point, all of these things that maybe are created as an accessibility technique, tool, aid, don't just benefit people who are hard of hearing or deaf. They benefit everybody. And it's interesting to see how that opens up all these avenues in unique, interesting ways. And, you know, again, I know this is a sweet spot for you.
Well, I have all kinds of examples with technology, but the way I like starting this conversation is, do you ever notice curb cuts?
Yes.
Do you ever notice how, like, at the side of a road, the sidewalk dips down and becomes road level? That is largely due to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was passed 30 years ago.
Right.
So what's happened is curb cuts are now ubiquitous to the point where you don't even notice them anymore. They just kind of fade into the woodwork. They're just there. But what's funny is that in study after study after sociological study, they find that 9 out of 10 unencumbered pedestrians use curb cuts as well.
Right.
You and I travel, if we're pulling a suitcase behind it, you better believe we're using curb cuts. If we've got grocery carts, if we're pushing kids in a stroller, you know, all of us are using curb cuts. So just as you said earlier, I mean, accessibility isn't just for people with disabilities. Accessibility benefits everyone.
Right.
You know, the iPhone won the Helen Keller Award for accessible technology, and I don't remember the exact year. It was years ago at this point. But when I read that, I was like, oh wow! So it's not an accessible version of the phone,
right? It's just
that
the
phone is accessible. And Apple went on to say, hey, we don't make technology for some of the people or even most of the people. We make technology for all of the people.
Right.
So I'm in there all the time. When I get text messages, I have my flash go off.
Sure.
When I get calls, I have vibrate
Me too.
going on. And back when I was able to taunt large audiences, you know, at the beginning of my talk, I'd say, how many of you here have your phones on silent? And all the hands went up. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And how many of you have a significant hearing loss or full deafness?
Right.
And all the hands go down. And I said, well, how many of you ever pinched and stretched on your phone to increase the size? And of course, all the hands go up. It's a ridiculous question. And how many of you have low vision or full blindness? And all the hands go down again. And then all of a sudden you see, well, these don't sound like accessibility features anymore. Then they just feel like features.
Right. Right.
And that's really what it's all about. You know, closed captioning to watch Japanese anime. When I ride the bus to work, back when I went into the office.
Oh, we were so young then.
We were so close. We were so close. But when I used to ride the bus to the office, not only would the driver announce the next stop, there's also a sign up at the front of the bus that printed out the next stop. So if I'm headphoned up, if I'm headphoned
Yeah,
up, all right,
sure.
yeah,
I
that
think we can do. Yeah, we'll
headphone,
count it. We'll allow it.
yeah, we'll verb all the nouns.
Exactly.
When I'm headphoned up and I can't hear the driver announce what the next stop is, I can do a quick glance and see what the
Yes.
stop is and go down. On the other hand, if I am reading like paper, like dead tree, or my
Strange.
iPad, let's not kid ourselves, right? I don't have to look up to see the sign anymore.
Right.
I can just listen. So again, this is just the multisensory experience, and it's all around us.
Right.
We've discovered that. Have you noticed it's hard to understand someone when they're
Yeah.
wearing a mask?
Oh, I don't.
Because you don't realize
know how much lip reading we do.
visual,
Yeah.
yeah, how visual it is. And nothing has changed here. The audio
Right.
is still the same, but I have cut off one aspect of this multi-sensory approach that you're expecting. Now imagine if you're a lip reader on a Zoom call without closed captioning.
Right.
And there are 12 tiny little postage stamp sized boxes.
Right.
And you can't really tell who's speaking.
Right.
You can't really read their lips. And if you were able to, you see how we live a multisensory life, and we're waiting for software to catch up with what our everyday life is.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Scott. I mean, when it comes to some of these abilities to say, hey, just roll it back 10 seconds and turn on closed captioning. I mean, I've gotten so addicted to that. There is a streaming app that I will not name. I should to shame them, but I won't, that doesn't support that. And it's infuriating to me because, you watch a show where maybe the person has an accent that you're not familiar with, or, so many of these shows where the spoken word is quiet and then the explosions are loud. And so you're either constantly turning the volume up and down or just dealing with it getting loud. And it's like, I just want to clarify or something, say like, I wonder how they spell that, imaginary planet's name or something. And it doesn't work. And you're like, you get frustrated at that. Like, why are you doing this to me?
Yeah. When people talk about disabilities, and here's what's really interesting. The World Health Organization said that disabilities are something that's typically associated with excuse me, I ruined the punchline. You'll edit this all out in post, right?
Yeah, we'll fix it in post.
Okay, good. Let me start over again. You know what's really fascinating, Nate? Let me tell you what's really fascinating, okay? I will tell you, since you asked what's really fascinating.
Yes.
The World Health Organization, you might be familiar with them.
I've heard of them.
They say that an impairment lies with an individual. And we're very comfortable saying, oh, I have a hearing impairment, or I have a vision impairment, or I have a mobility impairment, or something like that. The impairment is with the individual, but the environment is what disables people.
Sure.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it for a minute. That the accessibility, the Americans with Accessibilities Act is all about removing barriers from the environment. And it's about disabilities, but it's moving disabling environments. And so what's so frustrating to me is the web, browser native technology, 100% accessible out of the box. No library to download, no framework to use. It just is accessible. Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee says the power of the web is in its universality. And that means people across all kinds of disabilities, but it also means the information we put out, if it's human readable, that's great, but we need it to be machine readable as well. It's all about trying to think about all the different ways this information is going to be consumed. But if you think about disabilities as what you're adding to your application, not your users, it's a game changer.
Right.
It's a game changer because curb cuts are a great example of removing barriers from the environment, and we all use it.
Right.
Closed captioning is a great example of removing barriers from our software platform, and everyone uses it. So that's been really my focus, is we can talk about impairments, and talking about this can be uncomfortable, but you know what? 25% of the United States has some form of disability. Over 1.1 billion people worldwide have some form of disability. That's a country
Right.
the size of China or India. But even in the US, let's put our ugly American blinders on right now and just focus on America right here. A quarter of your users have some form of disability. If you have a disability, it makes you a member of the largest minority in the world. And so if you have a commerce website and people are leaving their shopping carts because they can't check out, because you have HTML input forms where you have input fields and what I affectionately call free range text, just text hanging out that happens to be visibly next to that input, but it's not a label for this input. If someone fat fingers their credit card number and the label isn't associated with the field, you can't announce the problem. So the people who visually can see the big red exclamation points or the big red outline or whatever, you know, the visual people can complete their sales. Yay them, yay you. That's a win-win.
Right.
But if they can't hear what the problem is, they walk away. And this is real money. I mean, this ends up being billions and billions. Just in the UK alone, I think they said last year about 17 billion pounds were left behind due to inaccessible websites. It's called the clickaway pound. It's a great article, the clickaway pound, that talks about that in just one country. And if you extrapolate to the US, whose economy has many multipliers that of London, you get an idea of what the degree of the issue is.
It must be nice to have such a successful business that you can literally just say, I don't need your billions of dollars, go away.
Yeah. Yeah, United, they fly those big metal things up in the sky. I used to spend a lot of time on them.
I mean, I have a vague memory. That's the word. That's the word.
What they're called. United just announced that they're going to stop giving you swizzle sticks with your mixed drink.
Okay.
And that swizzle sticks represents an $80,000 savings for them annually.
Wow.
And so that's awesome, right? $80,000, that's a great big number, of course, you know.
And some plastic that doesn't end up in our oceans.
That's a rounding number just for the CEO's salary right there, right? But imagine a company the size of United. I'm not saying they do, but imagine them eliminating 25% of their paying customers due to inaccessible websites or mobile apps or physical locations. Again, I'm not saying United is doing that. I'm saying this is a hypothetical. That $80,000, yay us, no more swizzle sticks. And of course they did it for the environment too. And again, legitimately, yay environment. But imagine adding 25% to your bottom line. Those are real numbers.
Yeah, those are bonus numbers right there. That'll get you some extra stock options.
Exactly.
So we talked a bit about traveling. You know, I haven't left my house. I realized the other day we left the house to run an errand, and I think it was the first time in like 2 weeks that I'd physically left the house, other than like to go to the mailbox, right? And it was just very strange. Like I'm leaving the house. Where are you looking forward to going? I mean, theoretically, sometime this year we'll be able to travel again. Theoretically, although at our current pace of vaccinations, it'll be what, 2050 by the time we get vaccinated. Is there any place you're like, oh God, I can't wait to go there?
I was told that if I'm a guest on this show, I'm contractually obligated to mention Dr. Venkat Subramaniam.
I believe that is the rule. I didn't create it. Venkat has it in his rider. He was my very early guest.
Exactly. So I had coffee with him. I know. We live less than 10 minutes away from each other. It was a beautiful day. It was in the 50s. The sun was out. We went to a park. My family, Venkat's family, we were all wearing masks. We were sitting at 2 separate picnic tables. We couldn't even hug to say hello.
Yeah.
Where do I want to go first? I want to go to the park next to my house and hug my dear friend Venkat Subramaniam, right? And his wife and his kids. I want that first.
I hear you.
I want to give you a big hug the next time I see you, big guy.
God, I know, man. That's been the part of this that's been so hard. You know, I make no bones about the fact that a part of my rationale for starting Between Chair and Keyboard is it gives me an excuse to hang out with my friends on a weekly basis or thereabouts and call it work. And so thank you for doing that. But I miss seeing you guys. I mean, I know we've had a fairly regular kind of Friday touch point, and you and I've had a couple of FaceTime calls, and that's great. That means a lot. I love that connection. I miss seeing my friends physically and being able to give you a hug and catch up and grab a cup of coffee or, you know, grab a drink or a bite to eat. And, you know, so I don't necessarily care what city or country or state that happens in 2021. I'm just looking forward to that. So, you know.
You can't lift and shift the human condition, right? You just can't. And while this is great, you had to send me an invitation with a passcode and secret handshakes and all of the things. You and I had to go to a special room in our house and dedicated time and sit down and all that. And that's the opposite of the real world. That's the opposite of real life, where we are both at the conference together and I walk by and say, hey, do you want to grab lunch together? And you say, I do. Yeah. Can I bring my buddy Neil Ford? I said, that guy, I suppose. And but I mean, like, serendipity has totally been lost in all of this. And so I want happy, serendipitous meetings with people I like. That's what I want.
It's funny you mentioned that, because we've got dear friends of ours who our kids are the exact same age. In fact, Everett and Britta were born on the same day. I think Britta is technically a few hours older than Everett. I probably shouldn't say that, but she's, I think, technically older. So we've known this family since our kids were 6 weeks old, right? We were at the same daycare center. We're good friends. We have a lot of the same, you know, interests, likes, etc. We're good enough friends that when one of the newer Star Wars movies came out, I texted Tom and said, hey, we're watching the Star Wars movie. And he's like, wait, it doesn't come out till Tuesday. I said, well, it's available on digital. He said, well, what part of the movie are you on? And I told him, and he said, we'll be over in 20 minutes. I said, okay, well, we're in our pajamas. Like, no problem. We are too. So the whole family came over. Everybody was in their pajamas, and we watched the entire movie together again. We'd seen it in the theater together. So, you know, this was a repeat of that. But I miss being able to do that. You know, we had a holiday call with them, but it was scheduled, right? Because you have to work it in, and you have to, you know, make sure we're all at the same place at the same time and hop on the Zoom call. And then they were running late because they were on a Zoom call with like his niece and nephew or something. And, you know, so it's just, you're right, that serendipity is gone. And I very much look forward to getting that back sometime here in this year.
Yeah. Now, Venkat and I, over the summer, we started hiking, mountain climbing, but not ropes and gear and all that kind of stuff, just kind of walking on dirt. But we were able to do that because it was easy for us to be socially distant, and the crowds were fairly thin. When you're above the tree line, there's not a lot of people. Let me tell you, though, wearing a mask, stuck in wind at 12,000 feet, that's an experience, right? So there are ways for us to get out, and counterintuitively, I have gotten outside more. When it was still sunny out and I could like do reasonable things, I would get up every morning before work and I would walk 2, 3, sometimes 4 miles just around the neighborhood. We've got open space parks all over the place. And so being outside felt good. Being in the sun felt good, you know, and there was a chance that you would see the same people on the trails and nod and say hello to. We've had dear friends, close couples over for like, you know, drinks on the back patio, you know, but we're again masked up, 6 feet apart, but we're outside. So I have been spending a lot more time outside gardening and everything else. So there have been some upsides, but outside without a mask is my next
Hashtag life goals.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great point. I mean, one positive, at least for me, by not spending hundreds of hours on airplanes, that's a lot more time to, you know, be outside, ride your bike, play golf. I got to do a lot more of that in 2020 than I have in the past. So hopefully that sticks around for at least part of 2021, because I did really enjoy that. But, you know, I'm with you. I look forward to not having to worry about, you know, you walk into the pro shop, you know, is someone going to give me COVID here? And I mean, this stuff's getting really real. Like my neighbor across the street has it, and his wife has it, and her daughter has it. And it's like, where did you get it? And he's like, I have no idea. Like I've
Yeah.
been, they've been locked down, and it's like, so he thinks maybe he got it when he was out shopping, but that's where he started to go, oh, cool, 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 cool. So, fingers
Uh-huh.
crossed. So are there any other pandemic habits that you've picked up that you're hoping to continue into the after times, which, again, I'm being optimistic that there will indeed be an after time?
Well, I have started reading paper books
No.
again. I still like, I read the New York Times on my iPad. My iPad is the first thing I see in the
Yeah.
morning, last thing I see when I get to bed.
Yeah.
It's still there. So for me, if I want to sit down in a big comfy chair, I have
Mm.
started pulling out a paper book, and it's amazing because we're lift and shift. I think is going to be the theme here. We seem to think that you could lift and shift paper books onto the web or ebooks, and ebooks win for me
Hmm.
when I can travel and have my entire
Yes.
library with me. Right,
100%.
when I'm travel optimized, digital wins. But when I'm here, like I just reread the 20th edition of the Pragmatic Programmer
Oh, beautiful.
last year. I run a reading group at the ThoughtWorks Denver office. And so I purposely bought it on paper so I could
Sure.
like highlight key phrases. And I find that digital books are sequential access.
Mm.
Next, previous, next. And I'm not being completely ridiculous. Of course, you can, skip around and everything. But in a book, in a paper book, it's random access.
Sure.
I know that I've been sitting here in chapter 5 and I'm like, no, they mentioned that in chapter 2. And I can instantly flip back to chapter 2 and look and see the highlights. And so it's a different user experience. It's more spatial. There's geography to it. I have an idea of where I am in the book, how far I've come and how far I have left to go, and a
Right.
lot of things that are just missing. So yeah, reading a paper book,
Homemade
eating
bread.
homemade bread with tomatoes and fresh basil out of my garden. Yeah, and I'm not making light. Of course, there's been so much tragedy,
Yeah.
but in at the macro, but in the micro, those have been some really significant updates.
Yeah.
Walking in the morning, reading paper books, eating fresh bread, eating food out of my garden, just I really took for granted how much time I lost to airports and
Right.
Lyft rides
Right.
and hotels and all those things. I've got a whole bunch of time back, and I'm filling it with cool stuff.
No, that's a great point. I mean, I am very interested to see. I was just talking with Beth, the woman who helps me coordinate these conversations, about that before we started here today. The office is going to look very different, if and when people return to it. And I think there's an
Yeah,
awful lot of people who are going to look at this and say, we're a year and a half into working from home. I'd like to just make this my permanent arrangement. And I think that's going to happen.
yeah,
I was talking to a friend of mine who works at the University of Minnesota, and they have people on staff who have left the Twin Cities. They still work at the U. They do not
yeah.
live 20 minutes away
In
from
the
the
U,
U.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, and they're in positions that in the past you're always like, oh, that person has to be in the office because how can you have that conversation if they're not in the office? And it's like, well, they've had to do their job for the last year that way. So yeah, I guess if you'd prefer to live on the North Shore, then we'll support you in that. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see what that looks like when this is all said and done. But yeah, I agree with you. Although it's funny you bring up highlighting because I do highlight in ebooks, and my wife
yeah.
actually was commenting on that one night. She's like, "Why do you do that?" And I'm like, "I don't know, just because that's how my brain works." But I've gotten so used to the highlight being perfect that when I do highlight in
Oh,
a regular book, I'm like, "Oh my god, it's not just a nice perfect straight line. I'm so terrible at highlighting."
so you're pulling out rulers and
I
straight edges.
am. I mean, it's like it just my ADD nature kicks in, the OCD nature, and it's just like this is wrong. And in fact, I have a book right next to me that I had highlighted while I was in the car. Christine was driving me somewhere, and I was reading it and highlighting, and it was all jumbly because we hit a bump or something. I'm just like, oh, I'm gonna have to burn this book and get a new one because obviously I can't have my highlights look like crap. So yeah, the human brain is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so it's just so fun, like getting a chance to explore how the real world gets proxied
Yeah.
in the digital world, and the spoken interface that we were talking about earlier. we're not there yet. The
No.
best possible, Google has about the best accuracy rate on the market right now, and it's only about 85%. And so while that's awesome, I'm talking about automatic
Right.
closed captioning, automatic speech to text kind of going on. 85% is fantastic. It's a good solid B plus. But effectively, that's still dropping one word out of every sentence or more. And if you and I had an audio connection where it dropped one word out
Right.
of every sentence, we'd hang up, right?
Yeah.
We'd say, this
Yeah.
is not.
This isn't working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mozilla has a project called Deep Speech. And deep speech is your own personal, maybe personable as well, but your own personal, but the important thing is trainable
Sure.
speech to text engine. So that's one thing I'm really beginning to look at. If I could have a speech to text engine, deep speech, that is trained to exactly my voice, because what you and I are doing right now is we're trying to hit the bell curve. We're trying to be right in the big, fat, meaty, delicious part of that bell curve, because that's when Siri and Alexa and Cortana and Google and all these smart speakers work. But what if you had a speech to text engine that was tuned to your voice? I would think that that accuracy rate could get right up. And so it really is a trend to decentralization as well. We right now we keep saying, well, I'm going to put all of my source code on GitHub, and I'm going to put all of my photos on Snapchat, and I'm going to put all of my, status updates on Twitter. I've been putting it in all these centralized areas. If I reclaim them, if I decentralize them, and I have my own speech recognition engine, and I post my own images, and I post my own status updates and things like that, I'm actually going to get a richer experience because it is tuned to me. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be doing in this year is finding ways, this beautiful selfishness. You should feel comfortable increasing the font on your computer.
Sure.
You should feel comfortable changing the color scheme. You should feel comfortable watching videos with closed captioning on. You should feel comfortable adjusting the mouse sensitivity and the touch sensitivity and all these things. You should be deliciously selfish as a digital consumer. And that's a lot of what I'm going to be doing this year.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we should be more comfortable making these things our own and making it fit our needs. I'm a huge computer human interaction person, and I'd like to flip that acronym around the right way, human computer interaction, that
there you go.
We shouldn't be trying to bend ourselves to the computer's will, but make the computer fit our lives. And I think that's part of what's so amazing, as we've discussed today, about these multi-sensory experiences, being able to take advantage of that and being able to put it in places that we wouldn't before. We talk about the voice interaction, and it's amazing to me how often my son will talk to his phone. He does it all the time. That's like his default. And I've seen this not just with kids too. I've got a golf buddy he's the same way. We'll be out playing golf and he'll ask his phone a question. And it's amazing how that's become the default, not just for digital natives, but for many, many of us. I think that's really interesting to see the implications of that.
Yeah, and you can change the voice, and you can change the speed of the voice and the gender and all those things. And you shouldn't feel guilty about that. If you buy a new car, of course, you're going to adjust the seat and the steering wheel and the rear view mirror, and you're going to adjust everything. If you buy a new TV, you might go in and change the color, tune the color to your room, and change the power management settings and all those kinds of things. We should absolutely expect that from the apps we use. I have some apps on my iPad that were very clearly written for my iPhone just kind of blown up. So they're like giant thumb size, fist size buttons on the screen, but it kills me when I change the orientation and it doesn't change. It says, nope, portrait. That's not portrait. And so these devices really do need to be reacting to us and accommodating us. And that's what these are called. They're just called accommodations.
Right.
And we expect it everywhere else in life, and we should expect it in our software applications as well. One more time, just because this is brand new, and I just love this view. But I don't know if you can see up here. I'm talking to you
Yes.
on a teleprompter.
Yeah.
But it's just a third monitor. It's
Right.
just my laptop, but it's just a monitor up there. It's an 8-inch monitor, but it's being driven at 4K resolution.
Wow.
So I can read nothing on the screen, right? So when I'm in Zoom meetings, I can increase the font of the chat to like 200%. So on the screen, I can still read the chat and I can still participate. You know what I can't change? The size of the transcript in the side of the window right there, you know? And of course, that's a feature that is easily fixable.
Sure.
But 4K on an 8-inch screen has made me really aware of all these accommodations.
Right.
And you're wearing those things. I've tried wearing these things and leaning in, and there's just no way. I need to be able to increase the font in my apps. But what's really interesting is a lot of times you can increase it at the operating system level.
Sure.
But then things are cartoonishly large on my 27-inch monitor and legible on my 8-inch monitor. You know, so I mean, you know, these are all things that I'm just beginning to explore. We should all explore. We should really be deliciously selfish when it comes to technology. There's no reason not to.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was playing some video games with Everett over the holidays, and I was trying to read the very small font on like the cutscene, and I was looking at this going, you know, I've got this 60 whatever inch TV. That font could be a lot larger. And I'm thinking to myself, when the developers are building this, they're 18 inches away from a 32 inch, 27 inch screen, something like that. So it's perfectly legible for them at that distance. It's like, does nobody ever test the game on a couch in a living room? Like, isn't that part of the process? You know, could you give me the ability to just tick that up maybe 30%? Doesn't have to be 6-foot high letters, but you got a lot of real estate here. Let's take advantage of it.
Right. Well, what you're talking about, like, you know, if your computer is a Linux machine, this is your keyboard, then this is your interface. But when we're doing kind of big screen things, it's called the lean back experience, because that's what you've done, right? You've leaned back and you got your remote and you want to do in. Computers are kind of a lean forward experience. You lean into the keyboard, you reach into the mouse. And so when we just focus on syntax and lose the context of how it's being used, you're right. You just described the lean back experience. It's like, I want big fat letters on the screen. I want to sit back on my couch and enjoy it.
And not everybody that plays video games is 14 years old with perfect eyesight. You know, some of us are, you know, getting closer to that point of, I got to be a little further away from a device to see that text crisply. But anyway.
Well, I mean, and you want to talk accommodations, right? That's what's cool about this phone is that you can bring it in as close as far as you need. I've got friends who throw arm not long enough extensions, exceptions, you know, arm too short exception. Again, if I landed the punchline, it would have been a lot funnier.
I knew where you were going, so it worked for me.
But yeah, it's really funny how we do that with books, and we do that with our phones, and we do that with things. I've seen people who turn on the camera on their phone and literally hold it up like this and almost use it as binoculars. I've seen people at software conferences do that, and it's brilliant, right? Because this is binoculars. These are binoculars. If you do this, you can do. I've got a pair of Google Glass that I'm going to be playing around with. They've re-released those, and Apple is talking about releasing a set of smart glasses. Imagine what that interface is going to be like when you're sitting there watching glasses, but you got closed captions on your glasses now.
Yeah,
that's going to be the ultimate in kind of delicious selfishness when it comes to consumer behavior.
Oh, it's going to be really interesting to see how more immersive this could get. I mean, that's another feature of the watch that I use a lot with directions, you know, where it taps you, whether it's a left or a right. And that's incredibly useful. Yeah.
Haptic
That was
feedback,
something
haptic
that the
feedback.
Goose of Wild talked about earlier in our chat here today. And you don't even think about that until you're walking around London or Paris or something. You don't want to look like a total, tourist with your phone in your hand, and being able to put the directions on to get from point A to point B and have your watch just go tap, tap, tap. And it's like, oh, I turn left here, or I turn right here. Those kind of things are incredibly true. Or while you're driving, same thing. I mean, I use my phone all the time for driving directions, and not having to constantly be looking at my console, is also incredibly useful. But
And it's that multi-screen experience. I'll be sitting in my hotel room saying, all right, where do I want to eat in London? Oh, there's this really cool, butcher in Soho. So I will sit on my laptop and do the search, and I'll kind of do the eyeball, the distance. All right, that seems walkable. Great.
yeah,
Well, then I pick it up on my phone, just as you said. And then after I get that all transferred from my phone, I put my phone in my pocket and it's watch time.
right.
But it's that same experience. But look how you've communicated with the website and how it's communicated with you. It started with hands-on keyboard and a non-touch screen.
Yeah.
Come on, Apple, give me some touch screen love. But then it moved to a device that was only a touch screen and was handheld. Different form factor, different user interface. This one you speak to and it's got
Right.
speakers and all kinds of things. And then you put it in your pocket and now it's on your wrist where it's
Right.
visual and audio and haptic. I mean, that's a thing of beauty right there.
So I know we're running along, but I want to ask this question because we talked about it before we started. But is there a piece of tech that you have in front of you now that would have blown the mind of mid 90s Scott? That you just like, oh my God, this is just incredible. I can't believe that this is something I have in my life.
So I don't have my AirPods with me. I have AirPod Pros. Oh, see right there. Yes. That technology to me is darn near witchcraft because it is a computer. You're putting computers in your ear.
Yep.
And real time, it's doing transparency mode, filtering some sounds, other sounds. It's connected to your watch. It's connected to your phone. It's connected to your laptop. But this is what I wanted to demo and I couldn't. So I'll use this handy tin of Altoids right here. When I am using my AirPods on my iPad, and the case just gets close.
Right.
Not physical touching, but just close. A screen pops up and it tells me what the battery life is on my case and the battery life on things like that. Proximity computing.
Right.
When I take a case and just get it close enough to a device, that's magic to me. Now, you and I have a dear friend, Neil Ford, who it is the bane of his existence right now because he has AirPods and to hear him tell it, he's red-faced and shouting into the void, into the screen, into the Zoom call, saying, I have only paired these with this computer. You are my opera listening AirPods. I want you to listen to nothing else. I don't want you to ding when I get a new message. I don't want anything. And what's happened is as he walks through his house, his AirPods will magically detect to new devices. And so it's a double whammy because he wanted to listen to opera. And so the opera gets interrupted and it's now some other random bit of noise. So it's not perfect.
Zeroth world problem.
Me, proximity computing, wow, that is some next level stuff.
Yeah. That's a great point, Scott. Well, I could talk to you for hours, and I'm sure you have better things to do.
We almost have.
We almost have. I mean, we're getting pretty close to 2 hours, which imagine that, you and I. But I know you've probably got real things to do today, and I should probably also do that. And I haven't eaten lunch yet. I always do this. I usually talk about food. You and I didn't get to food today. So maybe we'll have to have you.
We were talking about gardening and bread.
We did. That's true.
Like
but maybe we'll have to have you. And you might be my first repeat guest, and we'll get into. I don't think I really asked you like even any of my questions that I have on my little cheat sheet. So there you go.
Oh my goodness.
I told you this is how this was going to go. So the system works. But anyway, well, so for those of you that are listening along at home, next week we're off, but then the week after we'll have Mr. Deshaun Carter will be joining us. So I'm very excited for that show. But Scott, thank you so much for hanging out with me, my friend. I appreciate it. This has been a great time.
It's always a treat. It is a joy talking to you. And let's get vaccinated. Let's get everything under control so you and I can give each other a big hug the next time we see each other.
That's a promise. I'll give you that one. Thank you so much, my friend. My love to your family. Cheers.
Why are we talking about
Thanks for having me. It's been a real treat. Take care.
Let me switch.